What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Savvy, and welcome back to the Savvy Show. And in today's episode, this looks like a top tier SCP. From the title alone, it's holding a lot of weight. So let's see if it could live up to it. This is SCP-186, to end all wars. So this could be a plethora of things. It could be a legit nuke, or it could be some kind of entity that could just, stop the conflict within both sides. Who knows? Either way, both options will be dope, but like always, we're going to find out today. So with that being said, if you guys are excited for this reaction, and if you do enjoy it along the way, please remember to smash that like button right over there, and also smash that sub button. Join the family. I'm telling you guys, if you're not already part of it, you like SCP content, you like my reaction style, this is the best place to be to get that fix of SCP heat. So with that all out the way, there's nothing left to be said, man. Let's get this show started. Alrighty, SCP-186, to end all wars. Lego.
History is often the greatest teacher. By looking at the past, we can learn from it with the benefit of hindsight. Such as in the early 20th century, when the entire planet was in the grip of a horrifying war. At the time, this conflict was often referred to as the Great War, although there was little great about it. Others knew it as the War to End All Wars, the largest armed engagement the world had known, although it would not be the last. Today, with that hindsight we just mentioned, we know it as World War I.
Okay,
In
I was
June
going to say,
1914,
what are you talking about?
an Archduke of Austria was shot dead by a Serbian assassin, and as a result of the complicated treaties forged between various nations, soon much of the world was involved in the war that started out as little more than a scuffle between neighbors.
Oh, God.
The horrors of trench warfare, the carnage caused by the earliest chemical weapons and armored tanks, left a permanent and lasting scar on the world's history, one still mourned and remembered.
A legit scar in the book. Come
The
on now.
advances in chemical and mechanized warfare that took place during World War I range from the use of chemicals like tear gas used to disable targets, to more lethal compounds like mustard gas. And of course, this was the first war to introduce
Look at those
tanks to the
tanks, holy shit.
battlefield. Although these were clumsy and cumbersome to begin with, it was arguably the advent of the First World War that forced many advancements in armored warfare. It was the belief of many individuals on all sides that if the Great War was made too gruesome and horrific to continue, it would come to its natural end. This, of course, did not happen, only encouraging each participant of World War I to continue advancing their weaponry. But what if there were weapons developed during World War I that were too dangerous to be deployed? With every side looking for advantage over their
More
adversaries,
dangerous than a nuke?
what if some turned to the unethical, even the anomalous, to gain the upper hand in the war? Introducing SCP-186. Otherwise known as
Let's see.
To End All Wars.
Let's see this anomaly.
Try to imagine weaponry that was so incredibly advanced for the mid-1910s, yet so horribly and unjustifiably cruel. Worse than gas that can cause blisters to form not only on the skin, but also inside the lungs.
Oh, God.
More advanced than armored vehicles with mounted machine guns crawling across no man's land. It's hard to picture something that could be more devastating than that.
Have you not heard about the SCP Foundation? Come on now.
Especially for the time period. But a good measure of a weapon's destructive power is usually found in the damage it leaves in its wake. In this case, SCP-186 is exactly that. Not the anomalous weapons themselves, but the site of a battle that took place between the 24th of July and the 13th of August in 1917. The event became known as the Battle of Husiaton Woods, but you won't find any mention of it in the history books. Any and all records of the battle had been secretly expunged by the SCP Foundation, and their own archive is now the only place where someone can find the details of what happened over those few weeks. The engagement took place between the German Imperial Army and forces belonging to Russia's provisional government. A small skirmish in comparison to the enormity of many battles of the First World War. So what happened at the Battle of Husiaton Woods to make it so horrible that it had to be stricken from the historical record? For that, we have to go back to Husiaton, a small settlement in western Ukraine.
They're really playing with us, man. Like, come on, tell us what it is. Yo, I want to know this anomaly.
In July of 1917, the surviving remnants of a Russian division had been scattered.
I already took my history
Germans'
class in
counterattack
college.
against the Kernensky offensive had driven the Russian troops to the dense forest that surrounded the town of Husiaton. You might be forgiven for thinking that the outnumbered Russian force was decimated by almost 500 German soldiers pursuing them, but you would be very, very wrong. As the opposing forces met, they engaged each other in a fearsome battle. But this was unlike any encounter that had taken place over the course of World War I, or ever would again. Both sides were armed with anomalous weaponry, possessing technology beyond any that had ever been seen at the time. To this day, the SCP Foundation has been baffled by these weapons.
Wait, so this whole SCP is basically the war itself. This whole incident about all these anomalous weapons going at it on both sides. Is that really what it is? If that's the case, I mean, I guess that's like whatever. I wanted it to be like some kind of entity that actually like comes in and stops the war by, sheer power alone. But I guess this is a different way of, going about it.
Even with their unique understanding of the anomalous, Foundation researchers had been unable to replicate any of them, and instead keeps them secured in the munitions wing of Site-23, all under the designation of SCP-186-1. Among the recovered instances of SCP-186-1 is a highly modified Skoda M1909 machine gun. However, rather than behaving like a standard firearm, this gun would cause rapid-forming growths, not unlike tumors, to appear within the body of its targets. Another was concertina wire, a form of spiraled razor wire commonly used in trenches. Only this wire was coated in an unknown compound that caused permanent hallucination whenever the wire cut a person, and allowed the hallucinogen to enter their bloodstream. A number of rifle cartridges were also found littered around SCP-186. Sounds pretty normal for a First World War battlefield, right? Except these cartridges were not filled with gunpowder like you would expect them to be. Instead, they inexplicably contained human bone, ground into powder. The purpose of this ammunition or how it was manufactured is still unknown to the SCP Foundation.
Human bones?
As if a gun that causes tumors and hallucination triggering wire weren't bad enough. Foundation researchers also found a number of grenades used by the troops at the site of SCP-186. These were British Empire Standard Issue No. 27 grenades, but they contained a unique, anomalous gas that was capable of passing through any and all filters. Gas masks were developed during World War I to protect soldiers from mustard and tear gas on the battlefield, but these masks only offered basic filtration by today's standards. Even so, the gas contained in these grenades was strong enough to negate any and all filtration systems, but that was far from its worst quality. Did this unknown gas choke troops? Not quite. Did it disable them like tear gas? In a way, yes. But this gas did so by making any soldier exposed to it experience the sensation of having their bodies set on fire, constantly. Also recovered at SCP-186 were the remains of some form of explosive, and it is believed by the Foundation that it was detonated at the culmination of the Battle of Houston Woods, causing approximately a third of the battle's total casualties. Foundation researchers estimate that almost 300 civilians were either caught in the blast, or died as a result of the crossfire between the German and Russian forces. The soldiers involved were also all permanently incapacitated or killed, or at least, almost all of them. So where did these anomalous weapons come from? And why were they used just in this battle, not throughout the First World War? According to records kept from the public by the SCP Foundation, the German troops in the Houston Woods were accompanied by a Hungarian advisor to their military, named Matthias Nemes. Under his orders, they specifically targeted and tracked the Russian division that was retreating from them, who were similarly accompanying a French scientist, Dr. Jean Durand. It was these two men, Nemes and Durand, who were responsible for arming the Germans and Russians with their arsenals of anomalous weapons.
I wonder what organization he's from, the guy that made the weapons, because I'll be kind of interested to find out if he's not from the SCP Foundation. Other people are doing this kind of stuff, like the GOC maybe?
They had ensured that their inventions of death had only received limited manufacturing, and had intentionally joined opposing sides of the war effort to test their creations in real combat. In other words, it appears that Durand and Nemes has been working together since the beginning of the war, and the troops they were with had been manipulated into taking part in a big test. These soldiers were just as unlucky as the civilians caught in the crossfire. Today, the SCP Foundation has established an automated security perimeter around the site of SCP-186, preventing access to anyone unless authorized. Everything within the perimeter is frequently patrolled and observed by security personnel. Why the need for so much security at an old battleground? Given the damage caused by the use of so many anomalous weapons, including those that the Foundation was unable to recover, the area of SCP-186 has become a hotspot for unusual happenings, even long after the Battle of Houston Woods ended. These anomalies include abnormal environmental or weather conditions. For example, all the trees in the southwestern portion of the former battlefield died and decomposed at an accelerated rate
because of the weapons that was
while
used?
The temperature dropped to a permanent minus 15 degrees Celsius 4 years later. But yet there was never any snowfall. Then there were the sounds of gunfire in 1932, despite there being nobody inside the SCP-186 site. A number of years later, a pair of Foundation agents disappeared on a routine patrol of the area, and were never seen again. Of course, 23 years after the end of the War to End All Wars, the world was plunged into chaos and found itself at war once again. During this time, SCP Foundation personnel were instructed to evacuate the site of SCP-186, based on intelligence from their allied operatives who were working undercover inside the Third Reich. As the Foundation disembarked their observation posts, a faint glow was visible coming from SCP-186. 4 years passed, and the Second World War came to a close. The Foundation returned to re-establish their containment of SCP-186, and immediately discovered 13 corpses dressed in German army uniforms, bearing the insignia of the 4th Panzer Army. There were a further 27 bodies of soldiers wearing the garb of the Soviet 22nd Army. Both sets of bodies had already begun decaying, although someone had removed the dog tags and anything else that could identify these dead troops. It seems that history had, to some extent, repeated itself, as the Nazi and Soviet forces had clashed on the same battlefield where their German and Russian predecessors had fought during the Battle of Houston Woods. Years later, in 1959, a large sinkhole formed in the northeast portion of SCP-186. 4 men were found wandering nearby, all extremely disoriented, wearing decomposing military uniforms.
Ew, what the hell?
Were they lost survivors of the Nazi-Soviet battle?
Oh my
No.
God.
These men were in World War I uniforms, German Empire and Russian Standard Issue. They had survived the Battle of Houston Woods and were somehow still standing, even though they should have died during the First World War.
What?
How did these troops manage this? Well, the final anomalous weapon recovered at the site of SCP-186 were mortar shells, but unsurprisingly, these weren't your standard high-explosive artillery.
Let's see what it
Much
does.
like those grenades mentioned earlier, these mortar shells contained a unique, previously unseen gas. But instead of causing the perpetual pain of being on fire, this gas altered the biology of animal cells that it came into contact with. Somehow, it triggered a change that prevented a body's cells from ceasing life function, keeping them continuously operational.
Why would you want to do that to enemies? Is it not defeating the purpose? Wouldn't you want them to die? What?
In other words, it meant that any soldiers exposed to this gas simply could not die.
Exactly. Yeah, I figured. But like, why would you want that? Why would you want that for your? Oh, this SCP is weird, man.
That's right. Some of the troops involved in the Battle of Houston Woods are still alive to this day.
Makes no sense.
The SCP Foundation immediately began excavating the sinkhole.
Just made them immortal?
23 bodies buried beneath in a mass grave.
God.
There were more of the surviving World War I soldiers, kept alive for decades by the mortar gas. Some of them still had infected wounds and battlefield injuries that should have killed them. Yet their bodies refused to die. The soldiers were rounded up and hauled off to Site 23,
wants to die.
where the Foundation researchers began assessing them. However, they were unable to glean any useful information from the German and Russian troops that had been unearthed. All of the soldiers exhibited symptoms of extensive psychological trauma
I bet.
and had developed various mental disorders while buried alive under the battlefield.
Kidding me?
They had all been driven to insanity, perhaps as a result of their unnaturally extended lifespans, maybe from being buried underground and unable to die for so long. Or perhaps it was the wartime atrocities they witnessed that drove the soldiers over the brink. History is a great teacher, but those willing to forget its mistakes are often doomed to repeat them. Matthias Nemes and Dr. Jean Durand created the anomalous weapons responsible for SCP-186, and similar minds would later go on to build the atomic bomb and countless weapons of mass destruction after. World wars, the suffering of countless troops and civilians. These parts of history mean nothing if we don't allow ourselves to learn from them. And maybe that's our curse as a species, that we are doomed to fight the war to end all wars again and again and again.
So
now check out
the title is pretty much cap. Like, it's not actually living up to the hype. To end all wars. It doesn't do that. Like, it just talks about the endless cycle. We're always going to get wars. So obviously this SCP, for me personally, just my own opinion, was a letdown. I expected more, to be honest, but it's all right. Like, all of them can't be bangers. This was like just interesting, to say the least. Yeah. If you enjoyed the reaction though, please remember to smash that like button, smash that sub button, and hit that bell so you can stay plugged for each and every upload. And let me know what you guys thought about this SCP in the comment section below. If you guys have different views about it, I would like to hear it as well too. And yeah, hope you guys all have a good day. And unfortunately, that concludes today's episode. However, I'll catch you guys on the next one.